So let's get on to lesson 4. Back in the middle of the 1820s, President John Quincy Adams had actually offered to buy a chunk of land off of Mexico. He had offered to buy what would become Texas for about $1 million, and Mexico said no. A few years later, Andrew Jackson offered them $5 million, and in both cases, Mexico said, nope, we're not buying it. Mexico, even though they wouldn't sell us the land, they were allowing Americans to come into the territory. All they asked was that you followed the Mexican rules. So people moved there, they set up these big plantations, and they were growing cotton because the weather was good, and Mexico was pretty accommodating. They basically treated us like guests as long as we followed their laws while we were there. So in time, that started to fall apart though. The Americans living in Texas started calling themselves Texans, and they refused to obey the laws of Mexico. And eventually they said, this isn't Mexico's anymore, this land is ours now. So basically what they did would be like if somebody wants to come and sit in my classroom while I'm teaching because they don't like their class. And I say, sure, you can sit in the back, just sit quietly. And if they start turning up, acting crazy, I'm gonna have to kick them out. But if I let 15, 20 kids sit in my class, eventually they might say, well, Mr. Oliver, this is our class now. You're not teaching it anymore. And that's what we had done. We had basically outnumbered the Mexican people in Texas. So we chose a guy named Sam Houston to be the commander-in-chief of the Texan Army. And we said Texas is independent from Mexico. So the president of Mexico is a guy named Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. And he gets about 4,000 soldiers together and goes to San Antonio. He's met by a small army of Texans led by a guy named William Travis. So Santa Anna orders them to surrender. Instead of surrendering, William Travis and his men retreat to a place called the Alamo, which is basically an old church building that's been repurposed to serve as a military base. So we used the Alamo as a fort, and after many days, the Texans in the Alamo were defeated. So the Americans lost this fight. Santa Anna made sure that all of the Texans were killed. Now, depending on which version of the story you hear, they let the women and children live and told them to go and tell everyone else, you're no longer welcome here. There was a couple of famous Texans who were killed there. There was an explorer named Jim Bowie and Davy Crockett. Both of them died at the Alamo. So Santa Anna, ready to get rid of us, ready to get rid of the Americans, moves his army towards a town called Goliad and defeats the Texans again. So the Americans have lost 2 fights in a row. Now, Santa Anna's men are tired and they're exhausted, but they know they've beaten us twice in a row. They have the momentum and they do not want to lose it. So they try to defeat us once and for all. So they come for us again, and Sam Houston orders a retreat. We retreat towards the San Jacinto River, and our soldiers are inspired when they remember their friends who died at the Alamo and who died at Goliad. And we fight back against the Mexicans, and at the end of the fight, it ends up being that the Americans win. We defeat the Mexican army, and Mexico agrees to turn over Texas to us. So, at first, Texas is in kind of a weird position. They elect a guy named Sam Houston to be the president of Texas. It's not officially part of the United States yet. So, Andrew Jackson's presidency is ending. He's been president twice, and the tradition is to only be president for 2 terms. So he convinces the other people in the Democratic Party to nominate Martin Van Buren, who is his vice president. He basically said, if you liked the way I ran things, choose Martin Van Buren. He'll do it the same. During the 8 years of Jackson's presidency, the National Republicans joined with a couple other groups to form another political party called the Whig Party. So today we have the Democrats and Republicans. Back then, the main political parties were the Whigs and the Democrats. They were led by Henry Clay, Daniel Webster, and most of their support came from manufacturers, which means like businesses in the northern part of the country. They wanted to renew the bank. So the bank that Andrew Jackson had closed down, they wanted to bring it back. They wanted to keep the tariffs high, and they thought the government should be strong with lots of authority. During the 1830s, they had gone against many of the things Andrew Jackson did. They also did not think the Trail of Tears and the Indian Removal Act was fair. They didn't think it was right to move the Native Americans farther west. They thought it was unconstitutional. Even though the Whigs tried to convince Andrew Jackson not to do it, he still did it anyway. So Martin Van Buren promises he will follow the same approach and same, practices as Andrew Jackson. And Martin Van Buren is helped out quite a bit by that because Andrew Jackson is pretty popular at the end of his presidency. Martin Van Buren ends up winning the election 170 to 113, and the 113 is a combination of 3 other candidates' votes added together. So 3 people's votes added together wouldn't have beaten Martin Van Buren. So things are going pretty smoothly for some Americans. Not the Native Americans and not the African Americans, but the people who are considered American citizens are doing pretty well at this time. But things are about to change. So Martin Van Buren, when he becomes president, the country enters a depression. And it's not talking about like your mood. A depression in this sense is talking about when people are struggling with money. Many of these smaller banks that Andrew Jackson had dumped money in, they were careless with their money. They had given out loans to people that were never paid back, and they never made sure they were paid back. And if a bank keeps giving away money carelessly, that bank will eventually close. People had also been using money that was not backed up with gold or silver and just printed more and more money, and that causes something called inflation. When people heard that the banks were struggling, what happened is people rushed to their bank to try to take all the money out. But if everybody goes and takes the money out of the bank at the same time, these banks aren't going to have enough funds, and they ended up closing. So many of these banks close, and then what happens, since people have less money to spend, prices have to lower. So if you're a farmer and you're selling a basket of corn for $10, but everybody in town is broke, you might have to lower your price to sell that corn. Now, you're not going to want to do that, but if you don't lower it, you won't sell it. And if you hold on to it for too long, it'll spoil, and then you have nothing. So prices lowered and lowered, factories closed, and new work on fixing the roads and canals came to a halt. And unemployment spread, especially in the north. So he was promising to keep things running smoothly like Andrew Jackson did, but did not know that this was coming. Okay, guys, so I need you to open up chapter 11 and do the worksheet for chapter 11, lesson 4 and 5.